and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now Tuesday afternoon on the east coast of the United States, and of course, it's Tuesday evening here in Budapest. I can't say that I'm in the finest of fettle. I had a rather unpleasant appointment with the dentist today, so if I am a little subdued or a little off my game, then my apologies. Blame it on the dentist. Anyway, there are a few things that I want to get to, and because today was really a very big day in Washington D.C., we had this lying in state, so to speak, of Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. And we had all the worthies, including President Trump, of course, delivering eulogies to Senator Graham, and of course, in the platitudes themselves were not necessarily particularly interesting, but what was really the striking aspect of this Lindsey Graham wake was firstly the presence of Benjamin Netanyahu, and therefore his meeting that's scheduled to take place with President Trump, and whatever they're going to decide to do with Iran. So that was obviously something to look out for. And then, of course, there was the ubiquitous presence of President Zelensky, who really seems to have nothing but time on his hands. He just seems to be traveling all the time. Yesterday, he was in London greeting the new prime minister, Andy Burnham. Just in case anybody has forgotten his name, Andy Burnham. It's not Keir Starmer, it's Andy Burnham. So giving him greeting. It's apparently this is the now ritual of any incoming head of state or incoming head of government. You have to be blessed by Zelensky. It's like you present your credentials to Zelensky for his approval, and Zelensky evidently approves of Andy Burnham because Burnham promised him everything and then some. But anyway, so Zelensky then showed up today to meet Trump, and that meeting has already, of course, taken place. And of course, Zelensky is on a high from his interview with Laura Loomer, and with all of the celebrations that have taken place, particularly in the mainstream media, over Laura Loomer's coup in going to Ukraine, declaring herself suddenly a champion of Ukraine and a foe of all of the what she calls the woke right, but all of the conservatives who had been opposed to Zelensky in Ukraine and who had, on the contrary, had generally been skeptical of the war and were not rabidly anti-Russian. So people like Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and so on. So she spent, attacked all of those people, and of course. During Laura Loomer's visit to Ukraine and her innumerable tweets that she sent out, which was given very wide coverage in the mainstream media, of course, all of the excitement revolved around the issue. Well, is this now the turning point in the United States' attitudes towards Ukraine and, of course, to the war? Does this mean that Trump will finally throw in all of America's lot with Ukraine? And so is this the moment, the signal that we've been waiting for. So that was a lot of excitement. And of course, Zelensky is coming in on this high of this interview that he gave to Laura Loomer. Apologies for the ubiquitous police siren, which always seems to make its appearance at during these live streams. But anyway, so Zelensky met Trump, and here is the Financial Times account. Well, first of all, let's take a look at the tweet that Zelensky sent out following his meeting with Trump. It says, "Good meeting, of course, good meeting with President Trump at the Oval Office. Thank you for everything we do together to protect the lives of Ukrainians and advance peace. First and foremost, I offered President Trump our condolences on the passing of Lindsey Graham. He was a true friend of Ukraine. The president and I discussed licenses for Patriot interceptor production and several other ideas that could help. We also spoke about diplomacy. It's important that the diplomatic process be reinvigorated. Our teams will arrange the details of their further communication. I am grateful to the United States for its firm support." Now, of course, the issue of the Patriot interceptor missile production had, of course, come up during the Ankara summit when Trump, to the astonishment of most people, they said, "Yeah, fine, we don't have a problem with Ukraine manufacturing the Patriot interceptor missiles." And then of course, nothing much followed from that. But nonetheless, Trump did come out and say, yes, he has no problems with it. But as you can see from this tweet, there's little more than just a discussion, but no real firm commitments from uh, from the United States. And then, of course, we have this speaking about diplomacy, and of course, we know that of course, Zelensky has no interest in diplomacy. He's never had any interest in diplomacy. What he means by diplomacy is the standard Ukraine NATO demand for an immediate unconditional ceasefire, something Russia has already rejected. But nonetheless, they keep putting that forward. Oh, well, let's have the immediate ceasefire. So that's what they mean by diplomacy. But Trump himself hasn't said very much, and this is all Zelensky doing his PR, which of course is then taken up by the media. Financial Times reports Zelensky reports positive Oval Office meeting as Trump shifts towards Ukraine. This is the media narrative. You have to absolutely glom onto. Trump shifts towards Ukraine. Vladimir Zelensky held talks with Donald Trump and the White House on Tuesday amid growing confidence in Kiev that the U.S. president has become more supportive of Ukraine's position. The Ukrainian president's advisors and the person close to the Trump administration said the meeting offered Zelensky his best chance since Trump began his second term to secure fresh military backing and revive efforts to end Russia's full-scale war. So again, when they mean end the war, they actually mean, hey, send as much arms, money, artillery shells, everything. Just send it all to Ukraine, and that will somehow end the war. That's the formula for ending the war, because that's going to bring Putin, whatever, he's going to capitulate. It hasn't worked, but nonetheless, they'll capitulate. So that's the formula. Oh yeah, this is the way to end the war. And so then the Times, the Financial Times story goes on. After the talks, Zelensky posted on social media, "Good meeting with President Trump," which we saw that, and that blah blah. And then the talks mark a sharp shift from the tensions that once defined the relationship, with Zelensky privately crediting months of direct advisor level engagement for changing Trump's view of the war and Ukraine's prospects. His challenge, people close to both presidents said, was to convince Trump that backing Ukraine served U.S. interests and to appeal to the president's desire to be associated with success, an argument that has gained traction in recent months. So this is again the familiar media story that, well, the way to get around Trump, the way to get Trump to support Ukraine is to persuade Trump that Ukraine is winning, because we know that Trump likes winners. Trump is a big person who big winner, winning is his thing. And if you persuade Trump that Ukraine is winning, then and Russia's losing, then Trump is somehow going to say, whoa, if Ukraine is winning and Russia's losing, I better stop supporting Russia. I better get on board with Ukraine. I mean, that's the familiar argument. Of course, it is completely ridiculous, largely because it's Trump himself, while he has indeed, he's certainly suggested really from before the time he entered office. He suggested that he's even-handed, that he wants to bring peace between Russia and Ukraine, and that he has good relations with Putin and Zelensky, and he's in a position to bang heads together. The interesting thing is that he has nonetheless not really changed U.S. policy that much, actual policy on providing military hardware, but more important than military hardware, providing targeting intelligence to Ukraine. This has been reported, despite all of these stories about, oh, he's somehow leaning towards Russia, and somehow he has this soft spot for Putin, and the rest of it. He has been quite energetic in precisely in delivering intelligence to Ukraine that they can use against Russia to hit targets inside Russia. So if you just look at the stories that have appeared, actually in the Financial Times, the very same Financial Times that is saying, well, maybe, now we can, if we persuade Trump that Ukraine is winning and that he may come around, he may drop his love for Russia, he may come around and support Ukraine. It's this same Financial Times that reported that Trump was providing vital intelligence to Ukraine in order to hit targets, not just hitting military targets, but hit civilian targets inside Russia. Trump did this, as the Financial Times had reported. And then here we have Financial Times, Ukraine striking Russian energy infrastructure at unprecedented rate. Kiev's intensified drone campaign is spurring Russia's worst fuel crisis in decades. And then here he has, Ukraine is striking Russian energy infrastructure at an unprecedented rate. This was really earlier in July. So this report. At an unprecedented rate, according to an FT data analysis showing that Kiev's intensified drone campaign is spurring Russia's worst fuel crisis in decades. The number of successful Ukrainian strikes against Russian refineries reached an all-time monthly record of 16 in May. And then it says, since the beginning of 2026, Russian refineries have been hit at least 194 times, an 11-fold increase from the same period during the previous year. Kiev and Moscow have launched record volumes of drone and missile attacks and so on. And then here it says, Russia's defense minister says it is intercepting the vast majority of incoming drones. However, the sheer rise in frequency and quantity of projectiles has resulted in a growing number of hits on strategic energy facilities. And then says the campaign on Russian energy infrastructure has brought Vladimir Putin's war closer to home than ever, and so on. And then analysts attribute the growing success of Ukraine's drone campaign to its ability to significantly increase production as well as improved management. And then here we have a throwaway paragraph in this FT report. American intelligence assistance has also played a role, aiding Kiev in charting the best paths for its drones and helping to skirt air defenses. Senior Ukrainian officials. I mean, we've discussed it many times here at the Gaggle. I mean, there's nothing anything new about this, but it's very important just to emphasize that all these stories that somehow Trump has been reticent about providing aid to Ukraine and that Trump has somehow been pro-Russian or neutral as between Russia and Ukraine is belied by their own reports, by the mainstream media's own reports. And then here's the same thing is then confirmed in this New York Times report. This is December the 30th, 2025. And here, even as Mr. Trump bullied Mr. Zelensky, he seemed to cuddle Mr. Putin. And then when the Russians stiff-armed peace proposal and accelerated bombing campaign on Ukrainian cities, Mr. Trump would lash out on Truth Social and ask his aides, do we sanction their banks or do we sanction their banks or do we sanction their energy infrastructure? But in secret, the CIA and the US military, with his blessing, his Trump's blessing, supercharged a Ukrainian campaign of drone strikes on Russian oil facilities and tankers to hobble Mr. Putin's war machine. So despite all the Trumpian bluster, he was actually providing more aid, more critical assistance to Ukraine than Biden was. And then in June, beleaguered US military officers met with their CIA counterparts to help craft a more concerted Ukrainian campaign. It would focus exclusively on oil refineries and instead of supply tanks would target the refineries' Achilles heel. A CIA expert had identified a type of coupler that was so hard to replace or repair that a refinery would remain offline for weeks. And to avoid backlash, they would not supply weapons and other equipment that Mr. Vance's allies wanted for other priorities. And then, as the campaign began to show results, Mr. Ratcliffe, that's John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, discussed it with Mr. Trump. The president seemed to listen to him. They had a frequent Sunday tea time. According to US officials, Mr. Trump praised America's surreptitious role in these blows to Russia's energy industry. New York Times, Mr. Trump praised America's surreptitious role in these blows to Russia's energy industry. They gave him deniability and leverage, he told Mr. Ratcliffe, as the Russian president continued to jerk him off. The energy strikes would come to cost the Russian economy as much as $75 million a day. And then the CIA would also be authorized to assist the Ukrainian drone strikes on shadow fleet vessels in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Gas lines would start forming across Russia. So again, CIA would be authorized. Authorized by whom? By Trump. Trump would authorize the CIA to assist with Ukrainian drone strikes on shadow fleet vessels in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. And then here again is the FT. This is from October 2025. US intel guided Ukraine strikes on Russia energy side. One thing I should just remind us again, because we've discussed this a number of times before. This is October 2025. This was in the aftermath of the Anchorage meeting. You remember the Anchorage meeting was in August of 2025. The Russians keep talking about the spirit of Anchorage. Um, but after that, after Anchorage, there was another, and basically nothing came of Anchorage. Trump didn't apply any kind of pressure on Zelensky, which supposedly the Russians expected him to do, but Trump didn't do so. On the contrary, Trump let the policy be guided by the NATO powers and by Ukraine when he got back from Anchorage. But nonetheless, there was a brief flurry in October, just about the time of this Financial Times report. There was the brief flurry of that maybe there'll be another summit in Budapest with Viktor Orban as the mediator between Putin and Trump. But here, at this very time, when supposedly we're all taking seriously the idea of yet another summit, the follow-up summit to Anchorage in Budapest, is saying that this massive escalation of Ukrainian attacks on Russian energy infrastructure, huge escalation. I mean, the numbers show that this has been staggering numbers from what the numbers were before. But this was all organized, orchestrated by Trump. So let's see this report. Even as we're talking about this, the Budapest summit, and here we have U.S. intel guided Ukraine strikes on Russian energy sites. And then the U.S. has for months been helping Ukraine mount long-range strikes on Russian energy facilities in what officials say is a coordinated effort to weaken Vladimir Putin's economy and force him to the negotiating table. This is, as I say, this is always the alibi. Yeah, we're doing it because it's going to force him to the negotiating table. When has it ever forced him to the negotiating table? And the amazing thing is they know perfectly well this strategy doesn't work with Iran. I mean, we go every day. David Sanger, the New York Times' foreign policy analyst, their big thinker on foreign policy issues. Every day he writes, no one in the administration has the slightest hope that a new bombing campaign or a new heightened blockade is going to force Iran to negotiate. So if you're able to understand Iran isn't going to do it, why can't you understand Russia's not going to do it either? Russia's not going to, you're not going to bomb Putin to the negotiating table. But nonetheless, it becomes this dogma endlessly repeated, and then the media naturally just continue to repeat it. Oh well, that's the way we're going to do this. We're going to get Putin into the negotiating table. Anyway, here this is American intelligence shared with Kiev has enabled strikes on important Russian energy sites, including oil refineries far beyond the front line. And then the previously unreported support has intensified since midsummer. And so midsummer 2025. All right, let's just again look at the timeline. The previously unreported support has intensified since midsummer 2025. So in other words, at the time of the Anchorage summit, that very same spirit of Anchorage that some Russians keep talking about, such as Lavrov, the spirit of Anchorage support has intensified since midsummer and has been crucial in helping Ukraine carry out attacks that Joe Biden's White House discouraged. So Trump is doing here what the Joe Biden White House had discouraged. Joe Biden thought this is kind of dangerous and escalatory. Helping Ukraine carry out attacks that Joe Biden's White House discouraged. Kiev's strikes have driven up energy prices in Russia and prompted Moscow to cut diesel exports and import fuel. The intelligence sharing is the latest sign that Trump has deepened his support for Ukraine as his frustration with Russia has grown. So forget all the stories that we've been writing about, the Trump Putin relationship, the bromance, and everything else. We actually have ourselves reported it's the latest sign Trump has deepened his support for Ukraine as his frustration with Russia has grown. So there's nothing new about what happened at the G7 summit a couple of months ago. Nothing new about Ankara. Nothing new about these meetings with Zelensky. Oh, he's now coming around to Zelensky. This is from October 2025, and it says Trump has deepened his support for Ukraine. The shift came after a phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky in July, again before the Anchorage meeting, when FT reported the US president asked whether Ukraine could strike Moscow if Washington provided long range weapons. We talked about this. Trump signaled his backing for a strategy to make Russians feel the pain and compel the Kremlin to negotiate, said two people briefed on the call. The White House later said Trump was merely asking a question, not encouraging further killing. But strangely enough, everybody took it to be an encouragement of further killing. And then the U.S. intelligence helps Kiev shape route planning. This is just very, very important. This is a very important paragraph. The U.S. intelligence, they're not just providing Kiev with targeting information. Hey, boom, 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 boom. Here are the targets you want to hit. There's much more than that. It's all about how you hit the target, how you avoid Russian air defenses, how you guide the missiles and drones in a way not to alert Russian air defenses. That's the key intelligence. The guidance intelligence is what the U.S. is providing. The U.S. intelligence helps Kiev shape route planning, altitude, timing, and mission decisions, enabling Ukraine's long range one way attack drones to evade Russian air defenses, said the official familiar with the matter. Three people familiar with the operation said Washington was closely involved in all stages of planning. Closely involved in all stages of planning. A U.S. official said Ukraine selected the targets for long range strikes, and Washington then provided intelligence on the site's vulnerabilities. But others involved and briefed on the operation said the U.S. had also set out target priorities for the Ukrainians. One of them described Kiev's drone force as the instrument for Washington to undermine Russia's economy and push Putin towards a settlement. Now, that's a very interesting comment. Undermine Russia's economy and push Putin towards a settlement. Yeah, the goal, of course, is to undermine Russia's economy. Of course, it is to destroy Russia's economy, to destroy Russia. Of course, that's the goal. But we'll pretend that that's not the goal. That's not what we're trying to do. We'll pretend it's all about trying to get Putin to the negotiating table. Look, these people know perfectly well. If they know, that's the people in power, the people who make these decisions. If they know that this isn't going to work with Iran, you're not going to bomb Iran to the negotiating table. They're not going to do it. If they know that, then they know that it's like same thing. It's not going to work with Russia. They've been trying it for 4.5 years. They know it's not going to work. But they say this to the media because these idiot journalists just, negotiating. Oh, that's the way to get Putin to the negotiating. Oh, it's the way to get to the negotiating. Let's negotiate. They know that's not. They have no hope whatsoever that that's going to get Putin to the negotiating table. But what they can do is try to inflict as much pain as possible on Russia. And not just pain, in terms of, let's try to damage the economy as much as we can. It's much more than that. It's let us force Russian people to endure pain. Let's actually hit them the Russian people. So the Russian people enjoy pain. Now you say, "Oh, well, that's a war crime." But of course, it is a war crime. It is a war crime when you're essentially targeting the civilian population. But Ukraine doesn't do anything that isn't under the instruction of the United States and the EU. Everything it does is on that, on the basis of the instructions that they receive. And so everything that happens is therefore when they're targeting essentially civilian targets in order to hurt Russians, then that is under the instructions of the United States and the EU. And there's no better example of that than this recent attack on what they call, the Russia's Amazon. It's not Russia's Amazon. This is this wild berries, which is kind of Russia's online retailer. So they're hitting this Russia's online retailer, not because they think for one moment that this has anything to do with military procurement, that this is how Russia arms its military. It uses an online retailer to arm its provide weapons to its soldiers. Of course, that's ridiculous. That's not how any army operates. It doesn't use an online retailer to provide artillery and everything else to its military. But the point about hitting an online retailer is to hurt ordinary Russians. And so there was an article in the Telegraph the other day that in effect blurted this out. Now, of course, the reporter for the Telegraph was very happy about this because, of course, they regard Russians as subhuman, and therefore it's a really good idea to try to inflict as much pain as possible to Russians. So here is this story. This is in the Telegraph, and note the sort of the self-serving headline: "Why Russia's Amazon became Ukraine's number one target." Now, again, when one says Ukraine's number one target, then these targets are selected by the United States, by the EU. So therefore, Russia's Amazon, again, it's not Russia's Amazon, it's an online retailer. It's their leading online retailer. It became Ukraine's number one target, became the United States' and the EU's number one target. And it says, Kiev has begun a new campaign to bring the war home to Russia. Now that sounds fantastic, bringing the war home to Russia. Except what it really means is they're trying to hurt civilians, which, I have to repeat myself here. That is a war crime. You are not supposed to engage in any kind of targeting, the goal of which is to hurt civilians. And then it says Kiev has begun a new campaign that would bring the war to Russia after months of escalating attacks on oil depots and refineries. It has abruptly shifted targets, turning its sights to something more unexpected: warehouses and depots belonging to Wildberries, a Russian retail giant often described as the country's equivalent to Amazon. And then in recent days, Ukraine has struck at least 7 facilities belonging to the company, alongside smaller attacks on storage sites used by other e-commerce firms. The attacks have wiped out up to 15% of the Wildberries' overall warehouse space. Fantastic! It's 15% of the Wildberries' overall warehouse space. Marvelous. The Telegraph can barely contain its excitement. Zelensky has described the company's terminals as a legitimate target, citing their use to supply military wares to the Russian army. Now, this, of course, is you can always say that, oh well, it's illegitimate. I mean, does anyone really believe that an online retailer, basically used by all Russian businesses, is the way Russia, with its huge military industrial complex, this is the way Russia provides arms to its soldiers? Of course not. And even the Telegraph isn't buying this nonsense. The Telegraph accepts, yeah, but the Telegraph thinks, yeah, great, you're hurting ordinary Russians, marvelous. That's what you need to do. And on the ground, presumably that they will apply pressure on Putin and bring Putin to the negotiating and blah blah blah. But the reality is, hurt Russia as much as you can. And and then here it is: radios, combat gear, and body armor are readily available for sale, while chips contained in electronics housed in vast buildings can be removed and used instead to guide drones or missiles. So this the radios. What kind of combat gear? What you mean? You can get boots? Well, yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can find boots on Amazon, and no doubt they're boots that you can wear in combat and wear, when you're out hiking. Well, I don't know what they mean by body armor. Anyway, but the strikes have another effect. Oh, what is the another effect? Robert Brovdy, Ukraine's drone chief, said the strikes were aimed at destroying the illusion of a comfortable, well fed peacetime life enjoyed by the obedient biomass of an aggressor country. So the Telegraph is kind of very gleeful about this, and it quotes Robert Brovdy, Ukraine's drone chief. The strikes are aimed at destroying the illusion of a comfortable, well fed peacetime life enjoyed by the obedient biomass of an aggressor country. I'm not quite sure what he means by biomass. Doesn't sound very nice, to be honest, but the Telegraph likes it, yeah, because it's oh yeah, biomass. Presumably it's some, I don't know, mass, useless, useless occupation of space that needs to be eliminated, so that there'll be space there that isn't being used up by Russians. Encompassing almost 80 million active customers and some 1 million sellers, Wildberries accounts for 52% of Russia's e commerce market. That's why you hit Wildberries. You hurt ordinary Russians. A market which is booming, having grown 28% last year. But it's important to just focus here. Not the way the Telegraph wants to suggest that this is Ukraine brilliant idea. Zelensky came up with this wizard idea. Hey, why don't we hit Wildberries? That's going to hurt ordinary Russians, and that'll be fantastic. That's going to bring the war back home to the Russians. No, this was a plan cooked up in Washington and Brussels, and they gave these instructions to Zelensky. The destruction of its warehouses has sent a shockwave through the small businesses selling goods through the site. Hundreds of people have posted videos online complaining that they had lost large inventories of goods and would not receive compensation from the company. You can see the Telegraph is just, it can't contain its glee. The destruction of the warehouses has sent a shockwave through the small businesses selling goods through the site. Hundreds of people have posted videos online complaining that they had lost large inventories of goods. Wildberries policy states that the company does not sell military grade weapons, yet even a cursory review of the platform by the Telegraph was enough to find listings for a number of dual use items, including combat helmets, body armor, fiber optic cable, radios, camouflage gear, and a number of other components used to make drones. Well, I don't know what components make to use drones. I mean, presumably screws. People sell tools online. It's the kind of thing that you do. But notice it says Wildberries policy states that the company does not sell military grade weapons. Then the Telegraph goes off into a segue, which has no relevance to that. What has any of that got to do with military grade weapons? Yet, even a cursory review of the platform by the Telegraph is enough to find listings for a number of dual use items. Dual use items, anything's a dual use item. As I say, a screw and a screwdriver. Well, I mean, yeah, it can, it helps to put together. You can hang a picture on the wall with a screw and a screwdriver. Yeah, but it's also it's a component to make drones. So there's nothing here that suggests that that the Wildberries is lying when he says we don't sell military grade weapons. Of course, they don't sell military grade weapons. It's an online retailer used by small businesses and individuals. Kiev's new strategy, not Kiev, NATO's new strategy came after Moscow moved air defense assets, including some from the Arctic Circle, to guard some of the country's most embattled refineries. Now it has found a more vulnerable target. Okay, so they can't hit the refineries. So we can't hit the refineries anymore. Oh, let's hit an online retailer. Let's hit the small businesses. Um, yeah, but notice how if this were any other circumstance, hey, war crime. Um, where's the ICC when you need it? But here they say, yeah, this is pretty neat. We can't hit the refineries. So let's hit online online retailer. Let's hit the warehouse. Let's blow up all the inventories in the warehouses, so that companies that have shelled out all of their money on the delivery of goods now have lost all their goods and that can't get and won't be able to get compensated for it. That's neat. That's very clever. And then here we have with a sprawling network of more than 200 facilities across the country and some 5.2 million square meters of space, it would be extremely costly and arduous to guard Wildberry's entire infrastructure. Yeah, you can't really guard everything everywhere. Russia's a bloody big country. You can't guard everything. I mean, you just don't have the resources. And then here's some idiot from the Royal United Services Institute, another ridiculous operation to be found in the UK. Everything that always comes from the Royal United Services Institute is intellectually worthless. Anyway, they quote this woman, Emily Ferris, senior associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. It says, I'm not sure how Russia will be able to protect these kinds of targets as they're physically so large, aside from constructing infrastructure below ground, which would make it less of a target, but will take time and improving air defenses. Yeah, I mean, you've come up with this riddle. It's a riddle. How do you defend? How do you defend everything in a country that encompasses 11 time zones? It's a big country. It's 11 time zones. So that could mean that Russia isn't in any position to defend everything everywhere. So this fantastic idea means, hey, we can just hit whatever we like, and we justified in doing so. How you justified in doing so? We justified in doing so because that's going to hurt ordinary Russians, and if ordinary Russians are hurt, then they're going to apply pressure on Putin, and that'll bring Putin to the negotiating table. Everything's always about bringing Putin to the negotiating table. So we are allowed to sanction war crimes. We can do it because our cause is noble, because it's all about bringing Putin to the negotiating table. And then so this is this woman, Emily Ferris. And then Miss Ferris told the Telegraph that the fresh strikes may also have more of a social effect than previous rounds. Oh, social effect. And they quote her, the shift to warehouses and distribution will have an impact on the domestic market in Russia in terms of consumables. While fuel shortages are one thing, wild berries is like Russia's Amazon, and it will impact on domestic supply chains of everyday goods. Oh, great! So people are not going to be able to have all their domestic goods, and that's somehow good, even though you are not supposed to target civilians. However much you want to bring Putin to the negotiating table, you're not supposed to target civilians. That's it. It's there in the laws of war. And then it says, if the strikes have rattled Russians, they have only hardened Vladimir Putin's already uncompromising posture. Exactly. Telegraph blurts this out that it's not going to work. So, given that it's not going to work, you are committing doubly a war crime because you know that that isn't going to make any difference whatsoever. So, you're just hitting civilians for no reason at all, other than you want to hurt and punish ordinary Russians. Um, so that's that's on the Telegraph. Now, if we go back to where we started from, we're talking about Zelensky's meeting with Trump, and the issue here is that let me just find that. Yeah, that is that well, there's all the excitement that uh, Trump is under the sway of Laura Loomer, and it will be persuaded by Zelensky to take an even harsher position on Russia. So it says. The talks, this is today's talks, mark a sharp shift from the tensions that once defined the relationship, with Zelensky privately crediting months of direct advisor level engagement for changing Trump's view of the war and Ukraine's prospect. His challenge, people close to both presidents said, was to convince Trump that backing Ukraine served U.S. interests and appeal to the president's desire to be associated with success. Okay, now, and then here's the Financial Times getting very, very excited. One unlikely marker of that shifting debate is Laura Loomer, the far right activist who remains in regular contact with Trump, once a vocal opponent of U.S. military aid, who echoed Kremlin narratives. So notice how the way the FT is framing it. You say, once a vocal opponent of U.S. military aid who echoed Kremlin narratives. So when she held that position, she was echoing Kremlin narratives. So obviously mindless, brainless. She's just echoing Kremlin narratives. Now that she's gone over to our side and she's supporting Ukraine, she's not echoing Zelensky's narrative. No, no, no. Now she's apparently a thoughtful person, looking at the evidence, examining the facts before her, and drawing conclusions based on a study of the data. That's so yeah. Then she's just a mindless purveyor of Kremlin propaganda. Now she's a thoughtful foreign policy analyst. And here, so she's one vocal of echoed Kremlin narratives. Luma has spent the past week in Kiev meeting Zelensky and senior officials, studying Ukraine. Oh, she's now studying. So before she was echoing Kremlin narrative, now she's studying. She's sitting there with cracking the books and studying Ukraine's history and witnessing Russian missile attacks firsthand. And then it says, her visit was embraced by Zelensky, senior government figures, and energy executives, with officials even unearthing the birth certificate of her paternal great grandfather. That's what the officials unearthed. They unearthed the birth certificate of her paternal great grandfather, Pinkus Luma, born in Vinnytsia, west central Ukraine in 1895, in the hope that her conversion will impress Trump. Imagine that. They unearthed this birth certificate. All genuine, all absolutely genuine, no question about authenticity there. She now argues that influential figures on the American right have been taken in by Russian propaganda, a change Ukrainian officials hope could further reinforce Trump's increasingly favorable view of Kiev. There are signs that the effort may be working. After Loomer interviewed Zelensky, Trump shared the exchange on his social media, calling it very good. So, the FT continues with this ridiculous story, belied by its own reporting, that somehow, up until now, up until this moment of Laura Loomer's visit, Trump had somehow been pro-Russian. Even though, we looked at all the evidence that it was Trump who masterminded the attacks on Russian territory. All of that done by Trump. Trump engaged on things that even Biden wasn't willing to do. And incidentally, that isn't doesn't even begin to address the more sinister aspects of what Trump did. Because remember, there was also the attack on Russia's strategic bomber fleet that Ukraine launched. Remember, that's a serious thing. That's the strategic bomber fleet that was there on the ground in the open, because Russia was still maintaining the agreement. Russia was still maintaining the agreement under the New START treaty, whereby you still maintain you keep your strategic bomber fleet visible for the adversary's satellites, so satellites can see the bomber fleet and take note and see whether there's any cheating going on in the arms control agreement. So that was when the New START treaty was still in action. So there was the strategic bomber fleet was out in the open for the American satellites to record, and then lo and behold, Ukraine attacked them. Now Ukraine again doesn't attack anything without authorization from Washington. Particularly, you don't attack it when something that is so serious as the strategic bomber fleet, and something that involves the United States and involves data being recorded by U.S. satellites. So that was that which Ukraine did. And then there was a second thing, which again, that one could mention, and that was the attack on Putin in Valdai, which was clearly an assassination attempt, and a very serious assassination attempt. Russia complained to Trump about this. Trump initially, remember this was last December, Trump initially claimed that, he was really shocked and surprised by what Ukraine had done, even though the attack on Putin in Valdai took place after Putin had spoken on the phone with Trump. Remember, Zelensky was in Washington. He was talking to Trump, and then Trump went into the next room, had a phone conversation with Putin, and said to Putin, well, hang on the line. I'm going to talk a little more with Zelensky, and then I'll call you back. And then that's when the attack took place, while Putin was hanging on the line. So Trump's initial response was to say that, well, I'm really shocked and surprised by this. I'm going to take this up with Zelensky. This is unacceptable. You can't have assassination attempts on Russia's president. Then, of course, Trump changed his position and said, no, there was no attempted assassination on Putin, and that the Russians had lied about this. But that wasn't his initial response. And again, obviously this was an assassination attempt. Obviously, Ukraine would absolutely never have undertaken anything like this without the say-so of the United States. So the point is, this is a record. This is a long record of Trump actually engaging in very serious, very dangerous, very reckless attacks on Russia, while the idiot newspapers like the Financial Times, Trump is pro Putin, Trump likes Putin, Trump is very pro Russia, Trump is very anti Ukraine, Trump isn't giving anything to Ukraine, Trump seems to be siding with Russia. Some said they tried to kill Putin while he was on the phone with Trump. Yeah, that was what happened. Trump talked to Putin while Zelensky was meeting him, and then Trump said to Putin, "Well, why don't you hang on the line? I'm going to talk some more with Zelensky. So don't go anywhere. I'm going to talk some more with Zelensky, and then I'll call you back." So between the time that Trump hung up on Putin and Putin was supposedly waiting on the line for Trump to return the call, that was when the attack took place. Oh wow! Well, Trump is definitely. Oh, he's very pro-Russian. He's very, very pro-Russian. Anyway, but let's have to now. But apparently, it's up to Laura Loomer to illuminate things for him because she's been studying Ukrainian history. Anyway, here is Politico also echoing this story. Zelensky comes to Washington looking for unexpected new friends. The Ukrainian president is courting one-time MAGA critics as he mourns the loss of Senator Lindsey Graham. He mourns the loss. Can we? Let's all mourn the loss of Senator Lindsey Graham. Let's have a nice long mourn. Ukrainian President Zelensky arrives in Washington this week, having made initial headway courting the MAGA movement that has long complicated his push to keep U.S. support flowing for Ukraine's war against Russia. But if he wants to get the anti-interventionist wing of the Republican Party on his side, Zelensky will have a lot more convincing to do during his time in the U.S. There have been other signs that Ukraine is getting traction with the anti-interventionist crowd in recent weeks, including Vice President Vance, who recently praised Ukraine's defensive strategy and argued Kiev's battlefield performance could help create the conditions for peace. Ukrainian officials and their supporters have long hoped to bring a wider swathe of the Republican Party on board to back their 4-year war against Russia, in the hopes of persuading President Trump to stand by Kiev. Zelensky has arrived in Washington with a list of requests for Trump and is trying to seize the moment provided by new backers and the battlefield wins Ukraine has made in recent months against Russia. Again, the usual absolute nonsense about these battlefield wins. Notice how they never spell out what are these battlefield wins. What battlefield has Ukraine won? That hasn't. What they've done, what they've done is to make hitting all of these civilian targets. Yeah, they hit wild berries. No, that's what it is. They hit wild berries. Then they said, then what else? Well, they hit some refineries. Yeah, okay, they hit refineries. They hit some oil storage depots. Those are not battlefield wins. You can certainly hit these kinds of targets. They cause inconvenience, no question. They they do cause hardships. They're not battlefield wins. So when that was when they say, oh, that somehow the tide of the war has changed for Ukraine. The Ukraine is on the front foot, Russia's on the back foot. This is just simply untrue. These are just the usual kind of thing where the media want to tell a narrative. That's the story. Oh, Ukraine is winning, and so long as you don't ask any real questions, well, we all know what a battlefield is. If a battlefield win means you take a strategic bridgehead. You've moved the battle. You've grabbed a strategic bridgehead. You've captured a town. You captured a vital crossing. And you say, okay, well now that is a change in the constellation of the battlefield. Hitting an oil refinery, that's a couple of days repair work. That's all it is. That doesn't change the dynamics of the battlefield. But the media you have to keep maintain that story. And that's really what the media do. They just have to maintain that the propaganda story element. Anyway, the scores of hardline America First Trump allies on Capitol Hill do not share Loomer's change of heart. And then here's Tim Burchett. They say, I can't speak for MAGA, but I'm not coming round to supporting Ukraine. And then other MAGA aligned Hill Republicans argued they believe Loomer is getting paid to push her Ukraine friendly positions. So there's a story now out, and I can't confirm it because I was just but I saw this that they say this Ukrainian oligarch Rinat Akhmetov was the one who financed Luma's trip. That may be the case. Rinat Akhmetov is certainly very, very wealthy, but I haven't seen it confirmed that that he was the one who financed it. So anyway, that we'll see maybe by Thursday for the next live stream we'll have a clear idea whether Akhmetov was the financier behind Luma. Anyway, that was he goes, that's Tim Burchett. And then Zelensky is trying to sway Republicans skeptical of U.S. engagement in Ukraine with a few points, including emerging evidence that Russia has been backing Iran. Such messaging could land with the MAGA base that has been broadly supportive of U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran, even if that support is fading. And that, of course, brings us to the next part of the Zelensky trip, which is, of course, his attempt to persuade America, and particularly Trump, that the war against Iran and the war on Ukraine are essentially one and the same. That somehow our enemies are your enemies ours. Which is kind of the Lindsey Graham view. And of course, we know, and we did a separate podcast on this, that over the weekend, Ukraine hit an Iranian cargo ship on the Caspian. And this was, of course, very interesting because, Iran was very upset about this, understandably, because somebody was killed on the cargo ship. And they complained bitterly that Ukraine had attacked a cargo ship. When they did so, the Twitter world erupted and expressed outrage at Ukraine, because Ukraine had been providing the Shahed drones to Russia, and therefore these drones, which had been killing Ukrainians, which tends to be proof that Ukraine has effectively been a co-belligerent in the war against Russia, and therefore Iran deserves everything it gets. So that because Iran has been providing drones to Russia, and Russia has used these drones against Ukraine, therefore Ukraine is perfectly entitled to hit an Iranian cargo ship. And that was, you saw this argument everywhere on Twitter. And of course, none of them, none of the people who conveyed that message saw the irony that, well, all of Europe and the United States and Canada and, countries beyond, like Japan and South Korea, have all been providing military equipment to Ukraine in order to kill Russians. And that if you're going to use that logic, that Ukraine is entitled to hit an Iranian ship in the Caspian because Iran has been assisting Russia, whether it has or not, but that Iran has been assisting Russia, if you're going to apply that logic, then Russia is absolutely entitled to hit any NATO ship anywhere, because NATO has been a co-belligerent. with Ukraine. Any NATO ship anywhere, NATO in the Mediterranean, NATO in the Caspian, NATO in the Black Sea, any ship, because NATO has been providing missiles and drones and everything in between, ATACMS and HIMARS, and all the rest of these acronyms that we've been talking about. All of that. So therefore, if you're going to use the argument that Ukraine was entitled to hit Iran, then Russia is absolutely entitled to hit NATO ships anywhere, and particularly the British and the French, who have been providing Ukraine with missiles. These are serious missiles. These are the Storm Shadow, the Scalp missiles that do an awful lot of damage and kill an awful lot of Russians. So by that logic, I think British cargo ships are fair game anywhere. But this was the pitch that Zelensky made, was that Iran was receiving intelligence. So these are two separate things here. So on one hand, Iran is providing drones, weapons, whatever, to Russia, so that we're making Iran a co-belligerent with Russia against Ukraine. That's the argument. Then there's a separate argument that Russia is also involved. So Iran is involved in the war between Russia and Ukraine, and Russia is involved in the war between Iran and Israel, and Iran and Israel and the United States. So that's two arguments. So Zelensky claims that Iran has been providing the Russians with military hardware to hit targets inside Ukraine, and is also claiming that Russia is providing targeting information of American targets in the Persian Gulf and wherever, Jordan, whatever. Russia's providing that information to Iran, and therefore Americans are getting killed thanks to Russian intelligence. Again, there's very little irony here. You say, yeah, but as we've just seen, the mainstream media have gleefully reported how the United States is providing intelligence to Ukraine that Ukraine is using in order to kill Russians. These are, we look, Financial Times, New York Times, these are all gleefully reported. That this was the Americans were providing this intelligence that was being used to kill Russians, and now we're supposed to get indignant that Russia allegedly, and we have no, this hasn't been corroborated. No one has corroborated this. That Russia has allegedly provided intelligence to Iran in order to hit targets in the Persian Gulf and everywhere else in the Middle East to hit American military targets. Certainly you think, well, what goes around comes around. What's good for the goose is sauce for the gander, and everything else. But no, I mean, the Western logic is, well, we can do what we like because we are obviously on the side of good. We are obviously fantastic people. This wonderful, glorious liberal world that we have created. This what we call the liberal world. It isn't really, but what we call the liberal world is so fantastic. We're entitled to do what we like. Russia, North Korea, Iran, China, whoever, they're not entitled to it because they're obviously the bad guys, and they're against it. They're opposed to this world of ours. They're against that. Anyway, here then, this was the tweet that Zelensky had sent out, claiming that he had this evidence. Now, remember, this evidence that he claims he has, this was provided to him by the United States. Ukraine doesn't have, most sophisticated satellite intelligence. Whatever satellite intelligence Ukraine claims it has, it's been was provided to him by the United States. I will instruct our intelligence to share with our partners the information we have regarding Russia's new assistance to the Iranian regime. Since the beginning of July, we have recorded active Russian satellite surveillance of the Gulf states and US military facilities located there. These images subsequently appear in Iran. So we know all of this. We Ukrainians, we keep tabs on all this. At the same time, there is a clear correlation between Russia's satellite imagery of these sites and Iranian strikes, both before the attacks, in preparation for them, and afterward to assess the damage inflicted. Then it goes on. On July 19th and 20th alone, 4 air bases fell within the area of interest of Russian satellites, 2 in Bahrain, 1 in Jordan, and 1 in Kuwait. The purpose is clear. None of us in the world should turn a blind eye to one very simple fact: evil always seeks ways to make things worse and spread further. Russia must be stopped. This war must be stopped. Pressure on the aggressor must work. So here we see the Ukrainian plan, and of course, by the Ukrainian plan, we mean the plan cooked up by Zelensky's enablers within the EU or the United States. The plan, of course, is to get America and Russia at war. So you try it one way, and that's obviously through the war in Ukraine. You try to get them involved in Ukraine, but another way is to persuade the United States that our enemy, Russia, is your enemy. Russia's doing all these things to you. These two wars, they're the same. You have to realize that we're dealing with Russia. Russia's has all this malevolent intent towards us, and Russia has malevolent intent towards you. That's why he's coming to Washington to persuade the United States, essentially, to go to war with Russia for Ukraine, and say, hey, you're not going to be able to defeat Iran unless you defeat Russia. And that's the message he's come to Washington with. And it's one of the things that Netanyahu is obviously sympathetic to, because he himself is somewhat damaged goods, because he's got an election coming up. He's very unpopular inside Israel. Also, he hasn't really given very good advice to Trump, particularly on Iran. His crucial piece of advice: well, if you knock out Iran's top political and military leadership, well, you've knocked out Iran. So that plan that hasn't really worked out. So that's why he hasn't been welcome in the White House for some time, not since early February, when they cooked up this wonderful plan to go to war against Iran. So this is his first visit, essentially, for 6 months. That's a long time for between BP's visits. But anyway, so that was the message that Zelensky had. Now, Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, says Zelensky has attacked an Iranian commercial vessel, killing a sailor, a blatant UN Charter violation done at Israel's behest to drag Europe into its war. In calls with Kallas and Lavrov, made clear that what the freeloader in Kiev did cannot go unanswered. Notice freeloader. He's a freeloader in Kiev, which is itself very interesting because he is a freeloader. I mean, he does live off the kindness of strangers. I mean, everything is basically done by others. He's bankrolled by other countries. They lavish enormous sums on Ukraine. And then, so after Arachchi wrote this tweet, Zelensky has attacked an Iranian commercial vessel, killing a sailor, violation of the UN Charter, and says the freeloader, and it's done at Israel's behest to drag Europe into its war. What the freeloader in Kiev did cannot go unanswered. And now the Andrei Shibiha, the Ukrainian foreign minister, gives this response. Iran's threats are unjustified and groundless. The regime in Tehran is a direct accomplice to Russian aggression against Ukraine. So that's so the argument is that Iran it's a direct accomplice. Well, it's as much a direct accomplice as NATO is a direct accomplice in this war. NATO is a co-belligerent. They're providing arms and financing to Ukraine, fueling Moscow's criminal war with weapons that have killed Ukrainians since 2022. They've killed Ukrainians. And what about killing Russians? Who's providing the weapons to kill Russians? You're then a co-belligerent. If you accept Iran as a co-belligerent and Iran is a legitimate target, then NATO is a co-belligerent and NATO is a legitimate target. Iran has no standing to pretend to be a victim, let alone justify its threats with absurd references to UN Charter. And then with its statements, Iran also tries to shift attention away from Russia's terror against civilian shipping in the Black Sea, which is threatening global food security. Well, we'll talk about that. I think probably not really much time today, but I want to talk a little bit about this, the war in the Black Sea, because this war about civilian ships in the Black Sea was started by Ukraine. Ukraine started the war against civilian shipping in the Black Sea. They are the ones who started hitting Russian cargo ships in the Black Sea. Russia then retaliated. And then, of course, boom, Ukraine starts screaming, food security, global food security. They knew perfectly well Russia would retaliate. That was the whole point. The whole point was to attack the Russian cargo ships. Again, they were just simply shipping out grain, to attack Russian grain ships in the expectation that Russia will retaliate. And then Ukraine screams, oh, Russia's waging a war against civilian cargo ships in the Black Sea. But we'll take a more detailed look on Thursday. Anyway, Russia's attacks on freedom of navigation, but it's very important just to keep in mind this war in the Black Sea, war against civilian shipping, this was clearly, unambiguously started by Ukraine. Freedom of navigation will be at the spotlight of today's emergency UN Security Council meeting, and we expect strong responses by the international community. And now, today, Shibiha is singing a different tune. He's saying, today at 5 p.m. Kiev time, UN Security Council will convene at Ukraine's request. We expect a clear and principled response to Russia's latest attacks and so on. Russia continues to target peaceful Ukrainian cities while also threatening freedom of navigation and global food security through its attacks on commercial shipping in the Black Sea. And then we thank our partners and their steadfast support and so on. And then he says here, I called Iran's foreign minister Arachchi for a frank conversation. Diplomacy is about direct conversation, even when it's difficult. I stress that our goal is to avoid unnecessary escalation. I reiterated that all of Ukraine's actions are aimed solely at defending our country from Russian aggression and never intended to target civilian vessels or people. Note, so he's very much backing down from the blustery tone of Sunday when they were starting to start. Yeah, well, Iranian ships are legitimate targets. So I reiterated our actions solely defending country from Russian aggression, and we never intended to target civilian vessels or people. So what happened to all the big talk about how you're going to get all of your UN Security Council on your side? And then this is also true with regard to Iran's statements about their national who died and the civilian vessel that was targeted in a recent incident. Our goal is to counter Russian aggression, which is the root cause of all incidents. And it is Russia who bears full responsibility for all provocations and casualties. I emphasize the necessity to refrain from any escalatory steps, as well as to end any support for Russia's war against Ukraine. The war is illegal and it must end. Our position remains unchanged. Europe and the Middle East deserve stability, security, and peace. So there's no apology here to Ukraine for this their attack on not to Ukraine. I will say Ukraine. There's no apology by Ukraine to Iran for the attack on the Iranian cargo ship. So said, well, no apology here. But at the same time, he's not, he's backing down because he's not really getting the support from Trump, at least at the moment, not getting the support that he needs to escalate this war against Iran. So he's saying, well, it's all about Russia, but fundamentally, he's still justifying the attack on the Iranian cargo ship. And then you can see how the Wall Street Journal they've picked up on this two wars converge. The two wars are not converging. It's Zelensky who is seeking to converge the two wars. That's his goal. Two wars converge in the Caspian Sea as Ukraine hits Iranian supply line to Russia. Notice again, the Wall Street Journal just simply accepts it that this is an Iranian supply line in the Caspian Sea to Russia. So, and then they just repeating this talking point, obviously coming from the administration and justifying what Ukraine did. So the Security Service of Ukraine, an intelligence agency, said that it had launched drone strikes in the Caspian against the Russian oil field and a Russian missile boat and ships used to transport Iranian drones to Russia. The strike's part of a long-range drone campaign that has also reached deep into Russia, have brought Iran and Ukraine one step closer to direct confrontation. And then President Trump paused the strikes on Iran over the weekend while also deliberating over a possible escalation in attacks intended to break Iran's grip on the Strait of Hormuz. The Caspian trade offers Iran one way to circumvent U.S. military blockade on its ports against the Persian Gulf and along the Persian Gulf and the northern Arabian Sea. And Iran's southern oil exporting ports are more important for Iran's economy, but the Caspian Sea is Iran's most direct route to Russia, which has become an increasingly important military partner as both countries remain entrenched in war. But the problem is for Zelensky, is for Trump right now, this war with Iran isn't one that he wants to escalate. So this often happens, Zelensky listens to the wrong voices and thought, hey, this would be a cool time to escalate with Iran, to hit an Iranian cargo ship in the Caspian. This would be a cool thing to do. Trump will support us. But Trump right now, we've now had 5 nights of no hits on Iran. And 5 nights of no tit-for-tat attacks by Iran on U.S. positions. So this isn't really the right time for escalation. And that's why they've had to beat a hasty retreat because Trump is just saying, I don't want to go there. I don't want an escalation because, as it is, we're not really getting anywhere with Iran. And so that's why there's talk again that they're going to revive the memorandum of understanding. They may or may not be close to some kind of a new memorandum of understanding in which all the ambiguities of paragraph 5 have been ironed out. That may be the case, may not be the case. That's what the Times of Israel is reporting today, that there's a new memorandum of understanding. They're close to it. And that's why Trump uh, has held back for the last 5 nights from any attacks on Iran. So that's why the weekend ploy by Ukraine to hit a cargo ship in the Caspian doesn't seem to have been a great success. This isn't the right time to do it. The right time may come later, but at the moment, this isn't the right time. And hence, Andrei Shibiha, after the blustery response to Arakchi earlier, you can say, well, I had a conversation and we don't want to escalate and so on. And then here, so here, all right. So, and then here we've got the New York Times also picks up on this. Ukraine strikes on an Iranian ship could bring two wars closer. The attack in the Caspian Sea was an unusually direct encounter between the two countries that have been on opposite sides for years. And then they say here's how a look at the Iran and Ukraine have become adversaries through two separate wars. And Iran and Russia have had close military cooperation for decades. And so, you can see that the United States has accused Iran of supplying Russia with short-range ballistic missiles and so on. But you could see that this is part of the attempt to link these two wars together. This is clearly the voices, very articulately presented by Lindsey Graham and their followers in the administration, including Sebastian Gorka, that, hey, these two wars are linked together. We got to get involved in both wars. Russia and Iran are our enemies. And Laura Loomer obviously is very much on that line, and as well as Ben Shapiro. Russia and Iran are our enemies. Ukraine and the United States, we're on the same side. Russia and Iran are enemies. We got to go to war against both of them because they're an existential threat to us. Anyway, we'll see what happens during this visit. But you can see the outlines of the sort of the new neocon strategy of linking Russia and Iran and trying to get a war going against both. Could well happen. As I said before, I don't think the Ukraine war can be settled without some kind of an escalation that will involve a direct conflict between NATO and Russia. I just think that's where it's heading. What role Iran will play that's still up in the air, but I suspect Iran may well play a role, not quite the role that Zelensky would like, but I think Iran will play a role. Anyway, let's now turn to our locals community. These are the people, our locals, Gagglers, who do so much to keep our community going. They do so much to help the journalism they would do here, and they contribute so many interesting things to the Gaggle. There's so many fascinating postings, and then very generously they contribute to the tip jar. I think it's very generous. The dogs don't think it, but but they're dogs, and they're not humans. They don't quite realize these human courtesies. But anyway, thank you, everybody, all gagglers, for contributing. I really appreciate everything you do here. And anyway, so our first question today comes from our good friend Danaki, who's one of the Gaggles' most prolific posters. Always has amazing findings and really fascinating postings. So thank you so much, Danaki. And Danaki says, "I'm absolutely posilute that Peskov's dumb wife's idiotically ridiculous legal action for defamation because of sanctions will have a 100% success rate in the same North Korean court where Gazprom will successfully litigate for Nord Stream damages that and that both judgments will be promptly enforced and collected in full any minute now. I mean, it's been 4 years already, no rush." And then it goes on. Um, uh, uh, Also nice to see Vladimir happily grinning alongside Orange Donny in the Oval, or was it Oral Bill? Oh, that's not bad. Oral Bill office. I'm pretty sure he's totally out of cards and has been thrown under the bus 18 months ago already, as all of the piece of shit Xenon trumpets were triumphantly croaking all the time. I mean, I think you're you're right. It is kind of interesting. I mean, when we look back on the Trump era, or the second Trump era, how we really were taken for an elaborate ride by this the theater of the Trump Zelensky fight in the Oval Office that made headlines throughout the world. I mean, no one had seen anything like this, with Trump and Vance having a go at Zelensky, and then Zelensky given his marching orders, lunch abruptly canceled, packed off on a plane, and then he flies to his friends in London, and then he's hugged on the street by two-tier Keir Starmer, and then two-tier Keir said, "Well, I'm going to put in a call for you. I'm going to mend fences. I'm going to try and repair relations with the United States." And then we go through this whole thing, and then they meet again, Trump and Zelensky, at Pope Francis's funeral, and then they make up, and then we have the meeting in the Oval again after Anchorage, and so on. It's this elaborate piece of theater, and yeah, we were indeed, supposedly in the midst of Trump throwing Ukraine under the bus. He was, basically getting rid of Zelensky. Nothing could be further from the truth. As these few newspaper stories that I read out earlier make clear that Trump escalated the assistance to Ukraine, particularly the crucial assistance, which was intelligence assistance. It's more important than the HIMARS and the ATACMS and the rocket-propelled grenades and all the rest of the rubbish that Biden was sending Ukraine. What Trump did was crucial. Trump provided the intelligence, and that never stopped. At no point was there any stoppage in the provision of intelligence to Ukraine, the one that was hitting targets inside Russia. And then when they went from hitting military targets, they started hitting the oil refineries. They started hitting the Russia's energy infrastructure. This is all part of course, the Trumpian U.S. plan of trying to decimate Russia's energy industry. So that's what that Russia's energy industry. And then, of course, after that, they escalated it to start to try and inflict as much damage to Russia's economy, the consumer economy, to hurt individual Russians, all under the guidance of Donald Trump. So that was all of that done. So we had all of that theater that we went through, and Trump's very good at creating this theater. It was nothing. It was just it was pure theater. And here, he goes ahead, gives him everything Zelensky wants, and now, we have another piece of theater, the sort of the Laura Loomer, and apparently Laura Loomer is going to convert Trump to supporting Zelensky when we already know he's been supporting Zelensky all along. The stuff about the legal action, yes, I agree. All that is a complete nonsense, and but it's part of the strange um, habit of the Russians to subscribe to all these United Nations and the Charter and all these various UN bodies and UN agencies. These UN bodies, UN agencies, they don't have much time for Russia. I mean, they haven't exactly been particularly friendly and helpful to Russia at all. It's very strange for Russia to embrace this rather than to embrace a kind of a realpolitik, which I think would serve Russia much better than to pretend that Russia is really among the sort of the states of the UN Charter and the and adhering to all of the dictums of the of international law. It's not going to work. It cannot work. Um, and Russia after World War II it certainly took seriously the United Nations, but fundamentally Russia with the Soviet Union did practice realpolitik as the United States does. Um, and that's why I think Russia would be better served to drop all this stuff about international law. And it's not going to work for Russia's favor. None of the courts, exactly what Danak is saying, these courts are not going to rule in favor of Russia. Russia was going to lose in court after court after court. They're not going to win any of the cases. There's no point in pretending that Russia's going to win any of these cases. They're not going to win any of these cases. The states that also advocate on behalf of the United Nations Charter, they are not at all friendly and welcoming to Russia. And it's very peculiar. I mean, like we have the International Criminal Court. It's easy to forget that Russia signed on to the Rome Statute and continued even when George W. Bush walked away from the Rome Statutes. I mean, it was never ratified. Clinton signed the Rome Statute on behalf of the United States, but Clinton knew better than to try to get the Senate to ratify it. But George W. Bush then essentially withdrew the United States' signature from the Rome Statute. But Russia continued. It continued supporting the ICC and maintained its signature on the Rome Statute until, of course, surprise, surprise, the ICC turned on Russia. Of course, it was going to turn on Russia. Could it not turn on Russia? How could Russia not have seen that the ICC will be used against Russia? Of course, it was going to be used against Russia. It wasn't going to be used against NATO. It's going to be used against Russia. So that came as a bit of a surprise, and it was quite late in the day. I can't remember the exact date, 2016, when Russia finally, belatedly, withdrew its signature from the Rome Statute. So this, the whole idea of sort of being among the goody two shoes states supporting the UN Charter, it's not going to work. It's not going to work for Russia. The UN will always be used by the Western powers against Russia. It's not. It just isn't going to happen that somehow Russia will be among the coalition of powers advocating for the UN Charter. It's just it cannot be. Anyway, thank you so much, Danake. And yeah, you're right. How many times are we going to throw Zelensky under the bus? And how many times are we going to hear about the analogy between Ngo Dinh Diem, the ousted leader of South Vietnam, who was overthrown and assassinated by in a coup in Saigon, with the connivance of the United States, and that somehow that was going to happen with Zelensky. How many times are we going to hear that? I mean, oh yeah, the DM fate is awaiting Zelensky. In the meantime, Zelensky has canceled elections, and he enjoys the full support of Washington and Brussels as he cancels elections. So no, I don't think Zelensky is going to be kicked under the bus anytime soon. Anyway, thank you so much, Danaki. Cynthia, always very good to see you. Cynthia, who is our film critic and our film scholar and our film encyclopedist, who always helps us to understand films, to help us to know more about films, to learn something about cinema history and film production, and she helps us particularly in our weekly screenings, part of our Gaggle movie club nights, usually on Monday, but the movies that we post are available at all times. And so the screening takes place Monday evening, my time, Monday afternoon in the United States. Always something good. This week, we're doing one of the really great political thrillers made by Hollywood, which Advise and Consent, that I reviewed, but without a full screening. I reviewed it already, I think, some years ago. But it's a really, really outstanding thriller. If you haven't seen it, and even if you have seen it, watch the film. It's fascinating. You'll sit at the edge of your seat. It's such a great thriller from 1962. Directed by Otto Preminger, starring Henry Fonda and French Ottone, Walter Pidgeon, some of the great stars of that era. But it's just very exciting, very, very dark film. This there isn't an easy moralism here. Just about everybody comes out very badly from in this film. But as you watch this film, which is, as I say, a really exciting film, read Cynthia's very learned, very informed commentary. You're gonna enjoy the film that much more. You're going to find out a great deal more about how the film was produced, all of the bits and pieces that were added to it. Things that I didn't really know, for instance, the contribution of Frank Sinatra into the film and everything else, which I didn't know about, but I learned from Cynthia. So watch the film, read Cynthia's comments, whether before, during, after, and it's great fun. And it's a big draw for the Gaggle. That's why, when you join the Gaggle, you get to watch these great movies. You get to enjoy Cynthia's comments. So very simple, thegaggle.locals.com. Join and enjoy yourself. Great people here at the Gaggle. So anyway, Cynthia says Patrick Henningsen claims the US and UK helped carry out the strike on an Iranian vessel in the Caspian. Yeah, I'm sure that's right. I mean, the Caspian is nowhere near Ukraine. I mean, anytime you start launching these kinds of attacks, hundreds, if not thousands of miles from Kiev, Ukraine doesn't have the capability to do this. So this was obviously done in collaboration with states that do have satellite intelligence and do know how to hit targets thousands of miles away and how to avoid air defenses. And that's the most important part. How do you avoid air defenses? So there's no question the US, UK, and maybe France. France has sort of been quite gleeful about the intelligence that is providing Ukraine. So, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. While Trump publicly played dumb by telling Ukraine to stop strikes. He frames this as war by deception, using public messaging to conceal secret military intentions behind closed doors. If that's true, Is Trump trying to convince Russia that the US is pulling back its support for Ukraine, lulling Moscow into a false sense of security before a later surprise US led escalation? I don't know that Trump is doing that. I mean, I think Trump has, as we looked earlier on, Trump did this early in his second term by suggesting that United States was acting as a disinterested interlocutor, was a mediator, wasn't really taking sides between Russia and Ukraine, wanted to bring this war to as speedy an end as possible. Then they had the public falling out with Zelensky. The public claim, oh, we're not providing any more intelligence to Ukraine. Oh, we're holding back on the deliveries of weapons. So all of that took place early on in the Trump second term. So that was probably the time to lull Russia into a false sense of security, and that may well have happened. That may well have happened because, as we can see, or at least as we saw earlier, there has been a massive escalation in in Ukrainian drone and missile attacks starting last summer. That's when it started, these attacks. And that was clearly at the behest of the United States. The United States was pushing for these attacks. The United States was providing this crucial intelligence. And Trump was very excited by this. Trump was really very enthusiastic by Ukraine's attacks on Russia. Now, the meeting in Anchorage, you could say that that was an attempt to lull Russia into a false sense of security, and that's in fact what Lavrov seemed to suggest a couple of months ago. We talked about it here when he said, "Well, we thought there was the spirit of Anchorage, and we have to wonder now whether Anchorage played a similar role for the West as Minsk did." Now, that was a very interesting thing for Lavrov to say, because what he meant by that was that the Minsk agreements of 2014 and 2015, which were brokered by France, Germany, and Russia. Russia was one of the brokers, and that was admitted subsequently by Angela Merkel, by François Hollande, by Poroshenko himself, that the whole point of this Minsk process, which we began in 2014, 2015, and which went on all the way through to 2022, the whole point of that Minsk process was to give Ukraine time to rearm, to become much stronger, and then to relaunch the war that was essentially aborted in 2014. Russia could have absolutely won in 2014, crushed Ukraine. The West jumped in, as it always does, to save Ukraine in 2014. They negotiated the Minsk, and then basically used that time, which admitted to by Merkel, admitted to by Hollande, by Poroshenko, to buy time for Ukraine. And then, of course, NATO itself admitted through Jens Stoltenberg that we use this time from 2014 to help build up Ukraine. Now, when Lavrov said, well, we have to wonder whether Anchorage played the same role as Minsk, what he meant there was that, yeah, we kind of wonder, we went to Anchorage, we thought that you were seriously negotiating, but in reality, you were actually buying time to attack Russia. And of course, that's what happened. I mean, this was the time of the serious attacks. Serious. I mean, as I talked, that's when they hit the strategic bomber fleet of Russia, which was out in the open, for as part of the New START agreement, so the satellites could keep an eye out on whether Russia's cheating on the arms control agreement. And then, of course, there was that attack on Putin, that assassination attempt on Putin in December in Valdai. So that's what Lavrov said. Well, maybe Anchorage was the same thing. It lulled us into a false sense of security while you were actually waiting to clobber us. So I don't think Russia is buying into it now. I don't. I mean, I just don't think Russia now believes anything Trump says. I mean, what Lavrov said. I mean, if Lavrov says, "Well, I think Anchorage was just another Minsk. It was just another ruse to force us to trust the United States," while the United States was planning to clobber us. In this case, I don't really think it. In fact, on the contrary, there really isn't very much talk now about Trump um, playing nice with Russia. I mean, there are no plans for negotiations. There are no plans for talks. No plans for a summit. There aren't even any plans for a telephone conversation between Trump and Putin. You remember when he went to Ankara, he said that he would come back from Ankara and give Putin a call. He didn't do that. So he didn't call Putin even after he had apparently promised Zelensky that he was going to allow Ukraine to manufacture its own Patriot interceptor missiles. So I don't think there's any kind of talk from the administration to improve relations with Russia, something that Russia could then say, hey, well, maybe the Americans are serious about negotiations. So I don't, that's why all the talk now, and I think it's a lot of it is hooey about Laura Loomer and how the right, the MAGA right, is now on board for Ukraine, and they are persuading Trump that Ukraine is the good guy and Russia's the bad guy, and Russia is in with Ukraine, and Russia is in with Iran, and Russia and Iran together are the bad guys, and we in Ukraine are the good guys. That's where the talk is. That's where the mainstream media talk is. So I don't see anything now that could lull Russia into anything. I mean, I think Trump isn't even bothering to pretend to anything. I mean, yeah, he does this thing. Well, I didn't know anything about it, but you know, the Russians have learned painfully that that's exactly what Trump did after that assassination attempt in Valdai. Is that Trump's response had been, "Well, I don't know anything about it. I mean, I'm as baffled about this as you are. I'm going to ask Zelensky about it. Hey, what did you do? Did you really try to kill Putin?" And Zelensky, no, I didn't do anything. I certainly have the last thing on my mind was to try to assassinate Putin. No, I didn't do it. I didn't do nothing. Which is Zelensky. Well, and then Trump turns around and says, "Well, no, there was no assassination attempt." So this is classic Trump. Anyway, then Cynthia goes on. He also claims that the U.S. has no intention of backing off Iran, arguing its operations are funded through the end of the year and will continue unless explicitly halted, something he says is unlikely. Yeah, that's probably true. He calls it war by deception, another example of what he describes as using sham diplomacy to mask military goals, much like the tactics he attributes to Israel. If that's true, are claims of U.S. weapons shortages just another ruse to lull Iran into dropping its guard before a bigger U.S.-Israeli strike? Well, that could be. You're absolutely right. I mean, all of these stories about weapons shortages, we have to take them on trust. So the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, everybody reports about how the United States is running out of interceptor missiles. I mean, that may or may not be true. We're not in a position to know whether that's the case. It could well be a head fake to lull Iran into a false sense of security. Well, hey, the United States is running out of interceptor missiles, so we don't have to worry about anything because they don't have the weaponry. So it is possible that the United States is biding its time. Having said that, it's hard to see that the United States is actually building up forces in the region in preparation for a major military operation. Because at this stage, the United States would have to change the equation. They'd have to maybe launch some kind of an offensive, a ground offensive. You need a lot of troops on the ground to do something like that. Um, I don't think I am skeptical of the claims that the U.S. military is bankrupt. It doesn't have this. It doesn't have that. It doesn't have a navy. It doesn't have an army. It doesn't have an air force. I don't believe these stories. I think that's a head fake. I think the United States is it's spending $1 trillion a year on its military and has been for a long time. You're getting something for this. The notion you spend $1 trillion and you don't have an army, a navy, and an air force, that doesn't make any sense. So I'm not buying that story. Um, Having said that, you still have, what is the plan then? Yes, I think the plan is to come back and hit Iran again. Sure, absolutely. There's no question they're going to hit Iran again. But then you have to answer the question, with a view to what? What do you hope to accomplish by hitting Iran again? You hit it once in June of 2025, then you hit it and hit it and hit it from February the 28th to April the 8th of this year without accomplishing any of your goals. I mean, at least in June of 2025, Trump turned around and said, well, we've accomplished our goals because we knocked out Iran's nuclear facilities. Okay, whether they did or didn't, Trump could at least make that claim, hey, we have accomplished a goal. But in this case, I haven't accomplished any goals. In fact, there's been a setback in that now Iran has a grip on the Strait of Hormuz, which it didn't have before February the 28th. So it's a worse situation for the United States than before. And therefore, you have to think the United States is unlikely to put up with this indefinitely. However, what does it do about it? Short of a major escalation. And there's so far no evidence that the U.S. has the manpower and the hardware in place for that kind of a major escalation. So, but your point is about the deception, and that we should be very skeptical of these stories about how the United States is running out of weapons. I mean, just in the same way, when we were reading the stories how Russia is running out of weapons and missiles and artillery and so on, we were right to be skeptical of these stories. We should also be skeptical when they say this about the United States. Spending $1 trillion a year, that's a lot of money. You have to be producing something for $1 trillion a year. Yeah, I know, bureaucracy, but I can't believe that all of that money is lost on bureaucracy. So yeah, I think America and Israel are getting ready to hit it again. But what's the guarantee that the outcome would not be identical from before? But maybe they'll hit it again in a year's time. They think somehow a year's blockade, after a year of blockade, 2 years of blockade, Iran will be so weakened that a major U.S. hit on Iran will deliver different results. That may be the calculation. Um, but but a blockade is an awfully risky thing to undertake. The impact that that's going to have on the world economy is stunning. So, um, is this war by deception? Yeah, I definitely think that. Um, but at the moment, maybe there are things that we don't know, that we're being um, things are deliberately being withheld from us. But it's hard to see how the United States, just given the information we have, how the United States can accomplish more through another military onslaught on Iran that it hasn't accomplished. From February 28th to April the 8th. Just as this last few weeks of tit for tat attacks seem to have accomplished very little. So it's like, you haven't achieved anything there. Now you've got some more attacks. They haven't achieved anything. So, we have to see whether another big thumping from the US and Israel will accomplish more. I don't see it unless there's some secret weapon that we don't know about. Unless Iran is in a much weaker situation than we've been led to believe. No evidence for that. Iran doesn't seem to be suing for peace or begging for mercy or anything less. So it doesn't look like Iran is in a weaker position than we're being let on. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. It's a very great question. Stone River, thank you so much, Stone River. Good to see you again. It says, George, diplomacy, by which I mean true diplomacy, seems not to exist these days. Has it always been this way, or did something change along the way? Well, that's a really good question. I think there was diplomacy where there was a realization on the part of the West that it shared the planet with others. It just simply didn't have the strength to exert itself over everybody everywhere. So if one thinks about, let's say the Cold War era, then let's think about the interwar years, or and then the pre World War One years. You have a number of powers, not no one of whom can dominate the others. There's a rough balance between a number of players. With this Germany, Great Britain, France, Russia, and then of course you have on the peripheries. You've got the United States, Japan. So no one power is so strong as it can dominate the others. So there has to be diplomacy. You have to accommodate yourself to others. You have to accommodate yourself to the interests of others simply because you're not strong enough to get your own way. So that's when you have diplomacy, and I think there was diplomacy before World War One. The diplomacy failed, obviously, catastrophically. The diplomacy failed in the interwar years, but there was diplomacy. There was serious, active attempts to work out some kind of a security architecture in Europe whereby Germany's interests would be accommodated, and the interests of Great Britain, France, and the various small countries that had come into existence at the end of World War One. It was a very difficult project, and the great powers failed, and the result was World War Two. Now, the Cold War, obviously, we know that you had on the one side you had the Soviet Union dominating its alliance structure. So for a while, it looked like, well, you had the Soviet Union, then you had its Warsaw Pact allies, and it looked like it had China in its corner. So you had that was a powerful bloc, the communist bloc. And then on the other hand, you had the Western bloc led by the United States and NATO and later. So you think, okay, well, that was pretty evenly balanced. Suddenly, the United States-led West could not exert itself. It could not dominate that communist world. The communist world was just too strong. And particularly, while, yes, economically it wasn't very strong, and the United States-led West was much stronger economically, but militarily, the communist world was very strong. Very strong. Soviet Union was a nuclear superpower with a huge military, enormous military. And then, of course, you had China. Of course, the extent of the differences between the United States and communist China wasn't really apparent until the mid 1960s. But at least from 1949 through to the late 60s, people assumed that China was a loyal follower of the Soviet Union. So you needed diplomacy in those circumstances because it's so no one power can dominate the other. So you have to work out some kind of a modus vivendi. And that diplomacy was actually quite successful, particularly during the Cold War, when, well, obviously the Helsinki Final Act was an enormous accomplishment of diplomacy. But you also had other major agreements, which are now, in retrospect, seem stunning that they were ever accomplished, like the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I mean, that was a big international agreement that everybody signed on to. But the most important part of it was that the great powers, the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, France, China, all of them agreed to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they actually managed to sign this. It's almost amazing to think, wow, that was done. It's inconceivable that anything like this could happen, that anything like the Non-Proliferation Treaty could be negotiated and signed today. So there was diplomacy there, and then of course the Vietnam era also involved a very complicated piece of diplomacy involving the United States and Nixon and Kissinger, and then of course the Soviet Union and China, somehow to help the United States extricate itself from Vietnam's and to ensure the United States didn't lose face, that the war came to an end, no one was destroyed. And that was a complicated negotiation. I mean, you read the memoirs of Nixon, you meet Kissinger, all the elaborate negotiations that involved the Soviet Union, China, the Vietnamese, how that war could be settled without anyone losing face. So that was, again, diplomacy. Well, why no diplomacy now? Well, because of the unipolar moment. Cold War came to an end. The Soviet Union collapsed. The West took it as the Soviet Union lost the Cold War. The Soviet Union was defeated. And there was no reason, there was no need, whatever, to accommodate the remnant of the Soviet Union, which was the Russian Federation. That's because the Russian Federation was much weaker than the Soviet Union. Why should the West give anything to the Russian Federation? They lost the Cold War. Now they're much weaker than they were. You had the Soviet Union, big, strong state, military allies. Now you don't have any military allies. In fact, all your military allies have come over to us. The Warsaw Pact countries are now ours. You don't have anything. Why should we respect you at all? Why should we do anything for you? Why should we worry about your security? You're much too weak to enforce your will. You want to be the successor state of the Soviet Union. You're not the successor state of the Soviet Union. You're much weaker than the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union lost. We won. We don't need to, give you anything. We don't need to respect you for anything. And therefore, there was no need for diplomacy. When Russia said, well, we don't like NATO expansion, well, then say, tough. You're not strong enough to exert yourself. You're not strong enough to stop NATO expansion. That's what they said to Russia. You're not strong enough to stop it. The Soviet Union was strong enough to stop it, but you are not the Soviet Union. And so there was no diplomacy because there was no need for a diplomacy. Um, even when the Obama administration, I mean, the one diplomatic achievement in recent times was, I guess, Obama's negotiation, well, and others, the Europeans took part in it, of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran. I mean, it's very minor in comparison with the big agreements during the Cold War era, like the arms control agreements and of course, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But nonetheless, it was an agreement. But the United States ultimately said, why should we do this? Iran is so much weaker than we are. It's so much more inconsequential than we are. We don't really need to do this. And so they signed the agreement under Obama in 2015, and it was pretty obvious that it was clear that it was never going to be ratified by the U.S. Senate. And then the next man in, pretty much anyone, whether it's Trump or Ted Cruz or any Republican, the next man in is going to say, I'm walking away from this. Why should we do anything for Iran? I mean, Iran is so much weaker than we are. Why should we accommodate ourselves to them? We don't need Iran. We don't need to have any agreements with Iran. Iran should do as we tell them, just like Russia should do as we tell them. So that's why I think there's no diplomacy, because we're still living in the unipolar moment. And despite all the talk about multipolarity, it is still the unipolar moment. And until we see some evidence that the West has been defeated and that the West has hit its face against its limitations, maybe that's happening in Iran. We'll see what happens in Iran. Maybe that Iran could be the turning point. But until we see that, we say, well, we're living in the unipolar moment, and therefore, what do we need diplomacy for? So I think diplomacy takes place when there are adversarial powers that are more or less of equal weight, and that therefore they have to accommodate themselves to one another, and that's what they need diplomacy for. Anyway, thank you so much, Stone River. Oh, and there is Marty. Always good to see you, Marty. And here's Marty introduce himself with a picture of the late Lindsey Graham laughing uproariously about something. You got Biden, a youngish-looking Biden. I think before he was president, I don't know, he's still looking a little spry here. Behind them is that awful guy from that congressman, Trey Gowdy. Yeah, Trey Gowdy. Not sure who the other person there is. Looks familiar, but I can't. I know, next to Trey Gowdy. It's a very gruesome picture. Marty always likes to give us very gruesome pictures. But yeah, that's a golden oldie. Lindsey Graham, Trey Gowdy, and Biden. Yeah, that was one could certainly say that was not the era of the congressional heavyweights. This wasn't the one. We will not be nostalgic about the great heavyweights who dominated Capitol Hill during those years. These are not these are not congressional heavyweights. Anyway, and then Robert, always good to see you, Robert. Thank you so much, Robert. And Robert says, speaking of Graham's state funeral, oh God, one immediately thinks of the National Lampoon quip, Franco dies, goes to hell, which now that I think about it, has exactly the same brutally compressed cadence as the New York Daily News headline, Fought the City, Dropped Dead. Do you suppose the Lampoon was consciously riffing on the Ford headline? I know, and Franco dies, goes to hell. Probably. It's very interesting that was the Franco died in 1975, And it's funnily enough, this was 30 years at the end of World War II, and that was still a kind of a conventional view that Franco, well, he was just another one of those part of the Hitler Mussolini uh, era of the dictators. Um, but it was kind of anachronistic even then. I mean, when National Lampoon drew that headline, because between 1945 and 1975, Franco had integrated himself within the NATO structures. Spain had become a key NATO ally. I mean, it wasn't publicized very much, and NATO and Spain wasn't a member of NATO until after Franco died. But during the Franco years, the it was the United States was using the islands of the Azores, part of its project of projecting air power. So there was the Azores air base, and you can see on the internet all kinds of meetings between President Eisenhower, and Generalissimo Franco. Very, very jolly. You can see pictures of the two of them, very, very jolly, hugging each other like two old friends. Because Spain had become absolutely critical to the United States and NATO. Portugal, which was also run by dictator Salazar, Portugal actually was a member of NATO, even though Salazar was also in that the club of the dictators. So people weren't paying very much attention to it, even though you can see, you see these pictures of Eisenhower and Franco together. Yeah, Spain was in the part of the NATO club. So even when the National Lampoon thing, they were saying, oh, Franco, they remembered Franco from the 1930s and 40s, but they didn't seem to realize that Franco had now become a part of the NATO association. Even now, this is hardly commented upon. How this NATO, this pro-democracy, we're for democracy. you know, I mean, it was never about democracy. And NATO was always quite happy to have dictators among its members. Of course, the Greek colonels. No one kicked out Greece from NATO. No one kicked out Turkey. Turkey was always undemocratic, and yet was a member of NATO in good standing, as was, of course, Portugal. And then I said, so Spain wasn't formally a member of NATO, but the NATO-Spain partnership was thriving. And as I say, they had very cordial relations. The Eisenhower-Franco relationship was very cordial. So that headline from National Lampoon, I think, it was kind of anachronistic even then. I guess in terms of a headline, were they riffing on the Fort to City? Probably. It's the same year. I'm just thinking. Yeah, 1975 was the same year when New York City was about to declare bankruptcy and appeal to the federal government to help. And Ford rightly said, why the hell should the federal government help you out? So Ford to City dropped dead. Yeah, I think it probably was. It's the same year. So, anyway, thank you so much, Robert. And then NKMRD says, while fuel shortages are one thing, Telegraph excerpt, well, one would think fuel is very critical if one is fighting a NATO proxy of that side. Well, yes, you're right, but the fuel shortages are they're consumer fuel shortages. I don't think the fuel shortages are being experienced by the military. The fuel shortages are people using their cars to go on vacation or just running errands. That's where the fuel shortages have taken place. Though I think that also has abated somewhat, just going by newspaper reports. The fuel shortages, they've redistributed the fuel from one part of the country to another, so the fuel shortages for consumers has abated. But no, I don't think any fuel shortages for the military. At least I haven't read of any. And then Anne Marie, thank you so much for your generosity. I really appreciate it. And then of course Anne Marie, as I always say, why it's so important for people to join our community. Because we have so many talented people. We have talented people like Robert with his great philosophic speculations, and then of course we have Cynthia with her amazing cinematic knowledge, and then we have Anne Marie with her extraordinary talent. Is a internationally renowned violinist who performs in some of the top orchestras in Europe, who performs with some of the most distinguished composers and conductors of the 20th and 21st centuries, and has performed the most difficult pieces imaginable. I mean, these are really, really challenging works of 20th century music. They're among the most difficult to play. Anne Marie has played them. Anne Marie can talk about them, can write about the experience of playing them. And we are so fortunate here at the Gaggle to be able to enjoy Anne Marie's commentary, Anne Marie's recounting of her experiences, and Anne Marie's insights into the whole classical musical repertoire. So I can write about things in a very general way as a general introduction, but I can't get into the music from the inside in the way only someone who's an internationally renowned practitioner can. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. Thank you for all of your commentary, and thank you especially for your great generosity to the Gaggle. I think my time is up. Thank you so much, everybody who joined me. I know it's not a hard. It's been a tough day. Lindsey Graham lying in state is very hard. It's very painful for all of us to endure. But we have to endure it. We must. We'll be back on Thursday at the same time. I look forward to it very much. Thank you so much. See you Thursday. All the best. Good night. Bye bye.